Welcome back to Continuing the Conversation, where we bring you authentic AI insights. This morning, I spent 5 minutes just trying to find one buried file across 3 of my Google accounts. And you know what? I had a moment. I was bouncing between 17 different apps and none of them working for me. And I know you've had that same moment, that same feeling where your brain is actually saying, what's going on here? Meanwhile, people are fantasizing about robot butlers and nannies. When will my AI fold my laundry? When will it feed my kids? But the real AI revolution isn't just happening in 3D space, it's happening in 2D, right here on your screen. Every frustrating interface you touch is actually a constraint system that could be generated on demand. Think about it. That's crazy. Perfectly fitted to the way you think and the way you work. I'm Chelene Martin, AI enthusiast, business strategist, and co-founder of Revenue Pulse Advisors. My mission is making AI practical and powerful for real people in real life. And today, Rob's about to blow your mind on something you've been staring at all day without realizing its full potential. Rob, the CEO of CharmIQ, welcome back.
Hey, Chelene.
So people are waiting for C3PO to bring them their coffee and make their kids dinner. But you're saying the real action is happening in apps we already use 100 times a day. So let's dive into that and tell us, what are we missing?
Hey, Chelene. About 3 weeks ago, Genie 3 from the Google DeepMind team was released, and it gave us the first time that we could really explore a new world. Up to now, we've really been thinking about worlds in terms of text and things like that. Maybe you've generated an image, maybe you can generate a video. But to really get to the center of all that, where you can talk about an idea that you have and then really explore that. And Genie 3 did that. If you haven't seen the videos, if you haven't seen some of the demos out there, I highly recommend taking a look at them. And a lot of that comes from Demis Hassabis's whole notion of world models. Demis is the CEO of Google DeepMind. He's the one behind AlphaGo and all of those amazing things. Recently got himself a Nobel Prize, which is absolutely amazing. And his whole statement, he said this through many, many iterations now, is he's really interested in world models. Basically, think about that as physics for AI. And so what a lot of companies will do is they're trying to get their robots and whatnot to work. You'll train that in a virtual environment, and then you'll use that and apply that to your physical environment. So train in virtual, run in physical. And so they're trying to basically develop this. So go from text and images and so forth and like try to create a world so that if I'm looking at something and I turn and I look back, it's still all there. All the persistent things that you would think you would do. But what I think Demis is missing, and I think the whole industry is missing, is that they're only thinking about these things in terms of 3D spaces and robots. And we sit in front of our screens every day, as you already said, Chelene. We play with apps every single day. All of those are world models as well. They all have physics to them. They all have constraints that bind them to do the things that they do. So just as if you drop a ball and it bounces or it rolls or whatever, that's constrained by physics. When you're in an application, if you've had a file and you put it someplace, it should still be there when you come back. If you have a button in the corner of the screen, you expect it to be there. If you press a button, you expect it to depress and look like something and then come back. You have all these expectations around what interfaces look like, how they'll work. And again, all these constraints around them to make it so that just the button that was once here isn't over here and it's not over there. Or if you click something here, the thing doesn't appear over there. And so really the point of us asking this question on this podcast is to really get everyone thinking about more than imagine Genie 3 and playing a video game like that, but imagine a Genie 4 where it's building an interface that you're interacting with in real time. So if you put a button up in the corner and you click on it, you expect it to behave a certain way in certain things. And I think we're actually closer to that than anyone is thinking about, because specifically no one's working on it. And again, I'm really trying to ring the bell. I'm really trying to galvanize a bunch of people to start talking about this idea a little bit more. So everything that we're doing in 3D space, we can do in 2D space. And let me go one step further and just, we'll mainly focus on UIs in this 2D space, but let me just go one step further to like really put this idea in your head, why I think we're a lot closer than everyone gives it credit for. If you've ever read any fiction at all, what's amazing about fiction is that the author defines a world and then you inhabit that. And that world has physics to it. So the example I always love to use, if you've never read Nikolai Gogol's The Nose, that book is mind-blowing. It's a short story, and it's written by a Russian writer back in the 20th century, and it's about an official whose nose falls off, and it's treated as if it was a person. And it is amazing because there is no point in time at which you're like, doesn't make sense or whatever. Like, once you accept the fact that this nose is just somehow walking around as a normal person and is going through its day, you buy into that. So there's this notion of like a world model. Again, you're like your physical world. You see something and you move it around, but they don't have to be that way. Once you've defined the constraints of a world, once you've made the statement that noses can walk around and carry on their daily lives, then like it makes sense to you and you can live with that. And I'll go just one more step further. I love the writing of George Saunders. He wrote this book fairly recently, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. And if you've never read this book, it to me was the galvanizing game changer. And it actually walks through Gogol's The Nose as well. And he really talks about how what about fiction allows you to build these worlds and to allow them to be inhabitable. And so again, I hand to the audience this notion of like everything that we do. So not just the 3D worlds that we inhabit or the virtual 3D worlds that we play games in, or even the 2D worlds, as I mentioned earlier about UIs, but everything that you live in, it sets a set of constraints and you live within it. So for example, if you've ever worked on a legal contract, you know that there is a very tight set of bounds in that world that you live within. And either you have to figure out how to get around those constraints and work with them. And again, that's why I think that all of this stuff is so tightly coupled together, because we already are starting to see within our LLMs the fact that you can paint a world and it can live within that world. Sure, it'll sometimes escape. And I think that this will really help with hallucinations and things like that if we can think of this more tightly as a constraint problem. But again, as you think of literature and all these things, they all have the same thing running through them. And again, this is what I want to paint for our listening audience, is this notion that all of these things are the same, whether they're visual or mental. These world models are extremely similar and we're really getting close to them. And I think that this has a really large impact about how we'll think about UIs in the future, how we'll think about how we interact with these tools in the future.
Yeah, so every world model, like you said, every app has a world model. That sounds wild to me. Like that's a lot for me just as a statement right there. Can you make this a little bit more concrete or real? And what does that mean when you say like my email or my Slack has physics? That too is like mind-blowing for me.
This is great. So I love these examples because you know these things intuitively, but you may not have ever like actually thought about it. So for example, the difference between Slack, WhatsApp, and let's just say like Google Chat. They all have the core fundamental physics to them, right? You send a message, there's a file, like all those kind of things. But they all live in their own different worlds. Like, so Slack and Discord to me are very similar in the fact that you have just like these long streams of, and there's like all this interwoven stuff, and like, I can't figure those things out. So like, that's why I never use Slack and Discord. Cause like, I'm much more like an instant messenger kind of person where like you have threads and these other kind of things going on. But I hope you start to see that kind of notion, right? Like once you've made a certain set of decisions, once you've applied certain constraints and said like, we're not going to have threads, or threads are not the main participant in a conversation. You're just going to have a stream of information. Those are the physics of those interfaces. Again, thinking about the difference between like Yahoo Mail and Gmail and any of the other email tools that you have. At the end of the day, it's data being presented in a screen with a subject and a who and a from and like all this stuff, right? But again, the way that these tools work, once a set of constraints, like again, think of your 3D worlds, like once you've said that dragons exist and you can have swords and fire and like all these things, like then that world looks like that world. And again, it's the same thing with like Slack or with Gmail. Like once you've defined the basic structure of these worlds, then you can inhabit them, and then they have self-consistency, and then they make sense.
Yeah, so that was helpful in terms of the physics and the one world piece of it. So let's maybe take a step further and let's get like a little personal, like an example. Just the other day, I was juggling between like my Starbucks app because June needed her weekly Starbucks fix. I was also trying to set my fantasy football lineup and do a little research there because it's football season. I'm crazy about fantasy football. Two totally different worlds, two totally different logics. And I'm the one stuck translating between them, not to mention the 4 other apps I have open and that I'm working with. So, and I keep thinking like to myself, with all of this AI and all this technology and behavioral targeting and all of this, like, why do I have to bend myself to these tools instead of them bending to me? Because I'm the boss, right, of all these apps that I'm using. And maybe that frustration that I and maybe some of the listeners feeling jumping between all these apps and platforms and things that they have to use in their daily lives is actually pointing us towards something bigger.
That's a fantastic, brilliant, Chelene, brilliant. What's fascinating about all of that is, so what's interesting is companies want to create visual differentiators. Like you don't want your apps to blend in with other things. So as it stands today, other than common patterns that you have in terms of how you present information, cards and buttons and these kind of things, they actually try to make them look as different as possible, which as a brand identity, it makes sense. Yeah. As a user of these applications, it is frustratingly annoying to try to figure out, like, just where's my personal account? This morning I wanted to see which me I was logged into my Amazon account as, and I had to click 32 different buttons on the app before I could actually just figure out which one of the me's that I knew was going on. So I'll admit, like, I think the future. So let me paint a picture for a moment. If I would have said 3 years ago that like using Google wouldn't be a thing that you did, that using websites wouldn't be a thing you did, like all these things, you would think I was crazy, even though, by the way, I was saying these things. But what's interesting is if I start to say them today, especially if you use things like deep research and all these other tools, you start to think like, wait, I didn't actually look at those websites. Like I talked to my dude. I told my dude to go figure something out. It went out on the internet. It read all this stuff and it came back. I never looked at those websites at all. So, and you can see this in some of the latest Google filings that they just had because of the DOJ and whatnot. The web is changing fundamentally. And I've been saying now for a couple of years, like, I think the visual web is going to go through a complete rebirth as to what it looks like. Because at the end of the day, your agents don't care what your website looks like. They don't care at all what your website looks like. Yes. What they care about is the information in that website. And for whatever reason, we've associated highly brand over information for all this time. So on one side, there may be people out there that are just like, no, it'll never happen. If you look at Apple, for example, there's the dream that you just tell Siri to go do something and it will use the apps to go do whatever you need to do. Yes. And then there's always the question of like, well, then how does Apple make its money if individual app developers aren't putting the apps on there anymore? And we'll come up with a different economy. That's all I have to say. But yeah, we are absolutely moving to a world in which you are not going to have to decipher any of this stuff anymore. You're likely what my belief is, and maybe we'll get to a question like this in a little bit, but I believe that interfaces are going to become ephemeral. They're going to materialize when you need them, and they're going to go away when you don't need them. And I believe that it's going to be this blend between conversational and these ephemeral interfaces, because as we all know, conversation is slow for certain things. If I just want to scan something, I don't need pages and pages of text. Just give me like a quick list of things or a chart or something like that, right? So you always need non-textual interfaces to make things go. And I think, again, when you really think about where this notion of a world model goes, away from the 3D side of things, moving it onto your interface, I think that you're basically just going to have like a Siri or whatever a Bixby or whatever your agent du jour is. And I think that it's just going to surface these interfaces for you as you need them. And absolutely, it's going to learn what are the things that you know how to find, or it's going to put them in places where you know where they already are, or you're going to yell at it for the 30th time and say, I can't find that stupid button. And it's just going to put the big Chelene button up in the corner. Yeah. And that's the way I think the future is going to go. I think it is going to go so far away from the way our interfaces are today. And I'll put a caveat here, which is every time I say this to anyone, everyone's like, yeah, but interfaces have to be common. They have to be usable and it have to be everything else. To which I would say, yeah, everything I just said doesn't preclude that. I'm just saying for the situation in which you're in, the interface will be extremely familiar to you, but it won't be potentially the same one that you've seen the other 50 times because maybe you don't need a piece of that information for this interaction. It'll just be extremely streamlined for that. So that's where I think all of this stuff is going to go. And in believe it or not, like the very near future.
Yeah, so that was really good. You painted a really good picture on how this would work in practice in terms of generated interface and what that would look like. That is definitely very, very helpful because, and I love the way that it sounds because there's nothing more than I would love, I'm a big fan of talk to text for all of my AI, my charms, my agents, everything that I interact with. Even my kids now are doing talk to text even more. And what's even better than that is it sounds like the more I use these apps and systems and interfaces, the more they'll know me and the way I think and what my interests are. So that sounds incredible, right? That sounds like I'm all for it. Let's do it. But people listening are probably still thinking, sure, but I still want, the in-house robot that cleans my house, makes my kids dinner, and maybe tells me how much I owe on my taxes. So why should we care more about generated interfaces than robot butlers?
Great question. And all I'm trying to do here with this discussion is all that people are focused on are these world models around specific 3D worlds for robots and those style of agents. And I desperately need all the people who are working on these things to realize we're solving the same problem in 15 different ways. These are all the exact same problem. And so I don't think that there is one that's more important than the other. I think that we're going to get massive efficiencies and massive benefits by combining all of these notions into a single thing. So if you spend a lot of time reading about the multimodal models from Google, they're always focusing on how do we bring in all these different modalities. And I think it's even more than they're dreaming right now. So it's not just image generation. It's like literal full interface generation. And of course, that will even extend further all the way out into your 3D worlds, meaning both physical and virtual.
Yeah, that's so intriguing. So obviously you've been doing a lot of thinking about this and evangelizing towards it. So where does CharmIQ fit into all of this? And are you already building towards the future of generated interfaces?
Another great question. So the shortest way I can answer it is absolutely. Because I'm constantly feeling constrained by the tools that I have. So I always say this, we have this anything machine that is our browser. And it's fascinating, but in one tab, you'll have Google Docs, in another tab, you'll have Google Sheets, in another tab, you'll have Google Slides. And my question is if my browser can do those three separate things, why can't I do it all in one spot? Why don't I have a document that has a spreadsheet in it, that has a slide, that has a video whose interface is dynamically being updated, that has a simulation, that has a, et cetera, et cetera. And the short answer is, having spent a large time as a programmer in my whole career, is like, it's a lot of work. Every one of these paradigms are absolutely different and hard to get to work together and everything else. And so what we're trying to do at CharmIQ is we're trying to tear down all of those barriers so that we can start to get the first feeling of what does it mean to blend seamlessly between image and video generation, between working with your charms, your local LLMs, local friendly LLMs, to bring together content and ideas and put that into slides and drawings and spreadsheets and documents and like all of it. We're just starting there. What's interesting and annoying on the charm front is we're still bound by like the standard programming paradigms that we have today that I just don't think are going to exist in a year or two. So I see charm as absolutely the bleeding edge platform for you to start to think about what does it look like in the world when you break down all these barriers, and you'll have this infinite flexibility. But I'll be totally honest and say, I don't think Charm is going to be the one that's going to like unify all these. I think it's going to be a Google with a Genie 4 or something like that, right, that's just going to come in and just be like, nope, look, there it is. Like you just have a blank space and you just start and do whatever you need it to do, and the machine starts doing it with you.
Well, I will say that CharmIQ does do that today. For me, I went from this, sometimes I'm embarrassed to say, 20 tab browser, right? To it's really helped me organize myself into my thoughts into specific worksheets and projects, right? Which I love because you can't do that with ChatGPT. You can't do that with other platforms. You can't even edit simple things, right? When I'm reading through something and I don't like the way something sounds, or I hate the word bespoked, right? Thankfully, all my dudes know not to use that word. But even when it comes up, if I'm on my phone, right, and I'm using something else, I just want to remove that word, right? And I can't. But CharmIQ has allowed me to be way more organized in my thought process, in my work process, in my personal life process, by project, by workflow, by document. So it is doing that today if you really think about it. So kudos to you for doing that, and thank you, because you've made me a lot more organized and a lot more strategic in my thought, in my work process. So you've completely reframed how I think about AI's potential and how I even use AI. So while everyone's waiting for robot butlers and nannies, the real revolution is really making our digital tools finally work the way our minds work. And I know that my mind works way different than your mind, both beautiful minds in different ways. So here's my challenge for everyone listening. The next time you feel frustrated by an app or an app experience, whether it's juggling different email accounts or getting lost in your fantasy football lineup like me and research, or just trying to order a basic latte on a Starbucks app, don't just roll your eyes and get frustrated with the app like I do. Ask yourself, what if this app or this whole experiment was reshaped to fit me? What if it was behavioral targeting and user targeted to fit me in the way I think and the way I behave? Because that's not a dream anymore. That's an interface revolution hiding in plain sight. So, Rob, thank you so much for opening this thought, opening this window, and opening this door. And thanks for everyone for joining us today. And join us next time as we continue exploring the AI revolutions right in front of our faces. Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Bye.